So I couldn't help but notice that you've clicked on and are presently listening to an episode of Paranormal Patio. That's great. Thanks a lot for listening. We appreciate your support. And if you want to keep listening, you can find a whole bunch of other episodes on Spotify and wherever else you can get podcast episodes from, except for Apple. It's a personal decision. You can also find everything that you need to know about the show on paranormalpatio.com. We're on social media pretty much everywhere, I think. Just search for Paranormal Patio, and if we're on there, you'll find it. Also, we do have a Patreon, so head on over to patreon.com/beyondthepatio. You can get early access to episodes, tons of bonus content, monthly live streams, all kinds of good stuff. Thanks for listening, and we hope to have you back for the next one and all the other ones. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Paranormal Patio. As always, I'm Jason, and if you've come here for another Halloween life pro tip, I will consider giving you one. But before we get to that, my good friend Adam Tala has once again graced us with his presence, and this is Hair Raising Horror Week. And Adam, what is your classic Halloween costume? What's your favorite classic Halloween costume?
You know, I love doing a classic kind of zombie or a vampire look. People tell me I have an angry face, and I just go with it. I do something in that vein of look. Something where I can have an angry face and not have to do too much. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you practice all year round.
I sure do. Practice on the neighbor kids. They won't even come near. That's a pro tip for you. Scare the kids so that you don't have to give them candy and you save the rest for yourself.
You know,
but that's not my place to say.
You hit on a lot of things that are important right there, because tonight's episode with Joshua Cutchin is about one of his first books called Thieves in the Night, where the Fae would come and replace your child with a changeling and take your child away to fairyland.
What?
Yeah, we're going to get into it. But first,
well,
the other thing that you hit on is definitely perfect for another pro tip. Are you ready for this? Are you sitting down?
Okay. I am. I've been sitting.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, this isn't so much restricted to Halloween. You could do this anytime, but it's perfect for Halloween when you want to scare somebody, right? If you go into a public bathroom and you see that there's a stall door that's closed and locked, don't forget to try to repeatedly open it and give the person who's using it crippling, paralyzing anxiety.
That gives me anxiety just thinking about it. I'm not a public bathroom kind of guy. I'm not going to lie to you. So I'd be too nervous, but I'm willing to try it. I'm always willing to try something once.
Yeah, give it a try.
So I'll let you know how it goes.
Don't send your pictures.
I'm not sending any photos on this one. Don't you worry about that. No photos needed, please.
I'm Krista Coburn from Haunted Mitten, and you're listening to Hair Raising Horror Week.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm AJ. And you're listening to Paranormal Patio's Hair Raising Horror Week.
I'm Josh Van Hook, and you're listening to Hair Raising Horror Week.
I'm Geraldine Stitt, and you're listening to Hair Raising Horror Week.
Hi, this is Jill Shelley, owner of the Haunted Boyd House, and you're listening to Hair Raising Horror Week.
I'm Tobias Wayland, and you're listening to Hair Raising Horror Week.
I'm Stan Gordon, UFO researcher and author, and you're listening to Hair Raising Horror Week.
This is Bill Konkoleski, author of Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds and Experiencer 2 Two Worlds Collide. You're listening to Hair Raising Horror Week.
Welcome back to Paranormal Patio. As always, I'm Jason. We're rocking and rolling with Hair Raising Horror Week 2, the sequel. And I am joined tonight by someone who I came across that actually made me terrified for a few minutes thinking about some of the things he had to say, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to convey that to you tonight as well. So, Joshua Cutchin, welcome to the patio.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it's maybe throw a trigger warning in there, for the subject matter. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things that I want to talk about, and we're not necessarily going to just stay in this lane, we'll just kind of let the conversation go. One of the things that I really wanted to get into was your book, Thieves in the Night. And I'd kind of like for you to just maybe set that up for people who haven't heard of you before or haven't read your book. What is the book about, and how did it all come together?
Well, I had my first two books. The first one was A Trojan Feast in 2015, which was looking at food and drink encounters in paranormal, food and drink exchanges in paranormal encounters, I guess is a better way to say it. And then the second book was 2016's The Brimstone Deceit, which was about smells in the paranormal. And I really have a soft spot for whatever reason. I don't know why. But I have a soft spot for fairy lore, especially Western European fairy lore. I didn't really get a chance to write much about that. So that was kind of running through my head when I was looking for a new project. Like, what do I want to write about that can bring fairies in on? And, I kind of wanted to write something that scared me, that would scare people to read too. So that was another factor. And then I'm always about challenging my views of the paranormal and forcing myself to acknowledge and reconcile the things that I find inconsistent in my view of the paranormal. And I've been on the sort of Jacques Vallée Passport to Magonia bandwagon for a long time that the UFO phenomena and fairy folklore on a worldwide scale, really, because you'll find this stuff in the New World and Africa and Australia as well. It's one and the same. I really do think. I'm not saying that aliens are fairies or fairies are aliens, but I really do think that these things are at the core a shared phenomena, or at least function in similar ways, because there are just some really specific similarities. But with that being said, there are some things that I had to reconcile that didn't quite line up with that interpretation, and I wanted to challenge myself because I thought people might, get something out of that they can come along with me on the journey. And so in this case, it was looking at, how do changeling myths feature in alien abduction lore, and how do, human-alien hybrids feature in fairy folklore, and really trying to reconcile those two data points. And what ended up happening was Thieves in the Night, a brief history of supernatural child abduction.
Yeah, it's absolutely just... It's creepy, is what it is. To think about it literally in those terms is absolutely terrifying. And some of the stories that you put out in the book and that I've heard, on other appearances for other shows and things, like, they stick with me. And I don't know if it's just because I'm a parent, or it's just, even if I weren't a parent, I think I'd be bothered by them.
No, we were talking about this a little bit, before we started recording, and there was a little bit of a moment where I'm like, am I tempting fate by writing about this? Because we were planning on starting a family at the time. And, it does take you to some dark places. Some dark places in terms of superstition, but also some dark places in terms of what people did to kids, that you kind of have to face the facts on in a lot of these cases. But, on the other hand, it is kind of fun to be scared, and I didn't think that any of my other books were really that scary, so I did that, and then I got this cover. I'm forever indebted to Sam Sheeran for putting together the cover, which, I told him that I kind of wanted an alien that looked too much like a fairy and would make the UFO people mad on the front, or a fairy that looked too much like a UFO alien that would make the fairy people mad. And he really just said, I can't decide which one. And so he basically did the exact same image, one with a fairy reaching into a kid's crib and one with an alien reaching into the crib. And he's like, I can't decide on which one. I'm like, no, that's perfect. It's both, because it's the exact same image except for those two things. And that's part of the thesis of the book, is that we're really looking at a lot of the same phenomena here. So the front cover is the fairy, but the back cover is the traditional gray alien.
Mm-hmm. And both equally chilling. I think he did a wonderful job. Absolutely wonderful job.
Yeah, there was a time in my life when I would not have been able to look at that cover and sleep at night. Now I'm sort of desensitized, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, that does happen. The desensitization to all of this terror, that people like you and I dig ourselves into.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if you've heard me talk about this before, but like I used to have like a deep and abiding fear of the alien abduction thing, like into my 20s, like longer than I should have. I remember there was one day in my 20s where I was convinced that like a UFO was following me, and it was Venus. Like, but that night my phone was dying, and I wasn't familiar with the low battery sound, so it was chirping in the middle of the night, and I was like, "What is that?" So I was borderline paranoid. And there's some lines of researchers who would think that means that I've had an abduction experience, but honestly, anybody would be afraid of an alien abduction. I think it's silly to say that you're an experiencer if you've had that happen, if you have that fear. But I think the toehold that I got was that it seems like this has something to do with consciousness, and if it has something to do with consciousness, then I have some sort of say so in what happens to me if that scenario were to ever arise. And from that, a lot of that anxiety went away, and I'm surrounded by pictures of gray aliens here in my office right now at 9:00 at night. So yeah.
Where do you think that fear came from? Like, was it pop culture, or your interest in the paranormal, or what do you think it was that kind of instilled that into you so strongly?
Well, I think it's a terrifying concept to begin with, and probably akin to Monsters Under the Bed or Monsters in the Closet with like a techno modern twist. But I really do think I can lay a lot of the blame at the feet of my dad, who showed me Close Encounters of the Third Kind at a really young age. Mm-hmm. Which people don't think of Close Encounters as being a scary film, but that scene in the middle with the kid in the house, and the screws are going backwards on the floor grate, and the refrigerator doors open, and you hear something running through the house. Like, I'm getting chills talking about it right now. It's an amazing scene. So you've got that, and then you've got like that uncanny puppeteering on the hero, quote unquote, alien at the end. Hero in filmmaking terms, being the alien that gets the big money shot, which they named Puck, by the way. I don't know if you knew that, but they called it. I did not know Puck on set. Yeah, so it's another little fairy alien connection. I don't know if that was deliberate or not.
Wow.
Valet was kind of involved in it, so I'm kind of wonder if maybe there wasn't that sort of connection there. So yeah, so like that image of that gray at the end, like I literally could not look at a gray alien. Like, just even like a pop culture version of it would make me sort of anxious, to say nothing of, the cover of Communion or The Secret School or something. It just got in there early, and it just sort of embedded itself. So I would kind of wonder if this isn't, a 6-year therapy project that I've been on.
Well, if it works, who cares, right? If it helps you to sleep at night.
Yeah, it works, and it's resonated with me in a big way, and I'm very humbled to be working with and to have had kind things said by people whose books I had as a kid on my shelf. It's wild to me, and it's a little bit like it's a little bit like playing high school basketball and then hanging out with LeBron, and LeBron being like, "Good job, kid." It's like, really? No, not really. But yeah, it's been a great journey, and wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, you do an amazing job. I do want to say that and let you know that the effort and the scholarly approach that you take to your writing is phenomenal. So hats off to you.
Well, I appreciate it. It's sort of this. I feel like I'm this creature that thrives well in an academic environment, but also has a pretty low bullshit threshold for academia. So, I guess you end up writing well-sourced UFO books, and that's where you get placed.
That's the recipe. So we got into your childhood fear a little bit, and one of the things that I mentioned earlier that I really want to talk about is some of these reports, these historical documentations of changelings being put in place in cribs and toddler beds and all of this good stuff, back into the 1800s and probably before, right?
I mean, yeah, I think that you can find well before that. It's really hard to pinpoint exactly where this belief originates, because you see vague shades of it in North America, and you can find sort of variations on it among some indigenous African tribes, like the Abiku, sort of a version of it. A lot of the different shared attributes. I think you can go back to the Middle Ages at least. The idea that the fairies, which I guess we should maybe preface this and talk about fairies quickly for a second.
Yeah.
Not little Tinkerbells, but spirits of all shapes and sizes that are closely associated with the dead and nature and are quite capricious and could make your life great or horrible depending on how they perceived you or how you treated them. Sort of the shorthand version for fairies. Perhaps demoted pagan gods, perhaps again, the book that I'm working on right now is looking at them mostly as the human dead. So yeah, and then some people will say elementals, but there's a complicated history there that goes through theosophy and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, so fairies, not things to mess with, and they would have this habit of taking children. And you'll find this in, like I said, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different continents, and replacing these children with one of three things: an elderly fairy, a sickly fairy infant, or, a fetch or a stock, which would be like a log that was cloaked to look like glamour. Fetch being an Irish term for like doppelganger or double. They would always be sort of disguised to look like the actual infant that was taken, but would be, scrawny, always eating, but never putting on weight, sickly, yelling all the time, and typically these changelings would die in their infancy. And, the parents may or may not be aware that it was never their child. The motivations behind this, they would vary. The things that you would hear most often would be that, it's a way for fairy children to get human milk, because apparently fairy milk was a sham and they couldn't sustain themselves on it. Or it was almost like a hospice situation for elderly fairies, or more commonly, it wasn't about the exchange as much as it was the stealing. The actual stealing was the important part, because there were plenty of examples where, children were stolen without changelings being left behind. Supernatural child abduction is the subtitle of the book. And the motivation behind that was that the fairies were a dying race who needed, a fresh infusion of healthy human blood, healthy human genetic stock to sort of reinforce their dying race, which is like literally exactly what you can find in dozens of alien abduction stories when they're asked, why they're doing it. And that's sort of David Jacobs' whole MO in the alien abduction realm, is that, this is a dying race that needs our genetic material. To say nothing of, that milk angle too. I mean, there's a thing when there are these hybrid babies that show up in alien abduction lore and they're presented to the mother of the child, this half human, half alien, and the mother's always encouraged to suckle the child. Even if they're not lactating, it's like suckle. There's something about milk, that life force. And so there's another parallel there to the fairy stuff as well. So yeah, that's sort of your thumbnail sketch of changelings.
There are a few things in there that I'm probably going to forget by the time we get to the end of things I wanted to bring up as topics. But one of them is your allusion to the similarities between alien abduction scenarios and these fae reproduction, so to speak, of children or the sexual material. One of the things I literally just read today, I don't even remember where it was or who wrote it, but it was a little write-up about someone who had been, quote-unquote, abducted in the 60s. And they believed that they were taken to Venus, and they had this big sexual encounter with this beautiful Venusian woman, and later, under hypnosis, they kind of peeled away a little bit at it, and it was something that was implanted into his head that was what was happening, when really it was a sort of brutal and archaic harvesting of his genetic seed, so to speak. But they had placed this thought into his head that he was having this pleasurable encounter while all this is going on. And so that's something that's fascinating to me too. And I thought it's perfect timing for this conversation tonight, because I know that that's an angle that you approach a lot with this encounters with the Fae.
Yeah, I kind of have become, I don't want to say jaded, because I do think that there's a lot of, there's some sort of truth that we're all picking away at. But, the whole hypnotic regression thing people have criticized, rightfully so, as far as, well, is it actually being used for memory retrieval? Well, it's not really good for memory retrieval, but I'm sort of a little bit more forgiving in the fact that if you've got these archetypes and these cultural echoes that are showing up in that scenario that I don't want to, I know some people will be upset about this, but I almost don't care if it's real or not. There was this hubbub around the whole Travis Walton thing lately, and everybody's like, oh, is Travis Walton lying or not about his famous abduction? And I'm like, look, I don't care, because I found an account from like the 18th century of somebody who was abducted by the Wild Hunt, and it sounds just like the Travis Walton case. And I don't think that he was reading, old vellum manuscripts,
Yeah.
I think that these myth themes, these archetypes, just are so pervasive. They just run through all of our existence, and that's what I find interesting. So in the case that you mentioned, it's fascinating because, is what he remembered what actually happened, and there was some sort of suggestions planted by the hypnotist, or is it all somehow happening in his mind, and it's like the core experience is the only thing that was quote unquote real, and he's just putting different skins on it, or is there some sort of retrocausal time loop where he thought it was happening, but then it actually happened when he was on the hypnotist's couch, and that altered state of consciousness was the actual event? I don't know, but I can point to that, and I can say, look, here are all these again, those myth themes of hybridization, of collecting genetic material, of, if it was a screen memory, which is what a lot of people in ufology would say, it sounds just like, fairy glamour, the way that they would make a log look like a child, or, a elderly fairy man look like a child.
Right. And something else that I wanted to bring up was something we were talking about before we started recording, and that was the real world sort of causalities for some of these stories and explanations, things that wouldn't have been understood at the time, but we understand now, as far as disease in infants, or, genetic disorders, autism, even things of that nature, that you could look at some of these encounters and these stories from, way back when, with the lens of today's understanding of science and biology, and you could explain away some of these. Can I get just some of your thoughts on that?
No, I'm glad you want to bring that up, because I feel like it does a disservice to this topic if you don't bring up that very real aspect to all this. And it's actually a pretty good segue, because we were sort of talking about, we kind of want to say, oh, this wasn't paranormal. This was, people misunderstanding a medical disability, a developmental disability. And I get that from that sort of materialist way of thinking, the sort of physicalist, it has to be one or the other, binary, black or white thinking. But I kind of wonder if not necessarily even saying that, it's a metaphor for a lot of these developmental disabilities, but that it is one and the same thing, and just depending on one's paradigm is how it all falls out. But yeah, to that point, it's kind of been a common thing for medical historians to bounce back and forth as to what particular ailments a lot of these changeling stories were describing, and some of them fit really well. Actually, the autism one does not fit as well as I think some other ones do. You've got a good one that would fit would be progeria,
mm-hmm.
which is characterized by dwarfism, large head, wrinkled skin. Because these are all things that you'd hear time and again. But progeria is exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
I think there were only 100 people who were alive with it in 2014. But you've got cerebral palsy, spina bifida, progeria, PKU, Williams syndrome, Hunter's disease, Hurler's syndrome, I believe. Just hear all this stuff. You also hear people saying, "Oh, these are describing failure to thrive infants," and again, it's like every candidate is a 75% match. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So it really is probably a suite of things that we're looking at in these changeling stories. But I think that some of these are describing that. Now, having said that, there are plenty of stories where the changeling will interact, or the changeling will do something miraculous. And if there's any basis in those stories, there's not a developmental disability on the planet that will have a child, an infant bouncing off the rafters of the house, or, an infant turn to you and say, well, I saw the acorn before the oak, but I've never seen a brewery in a set of eggshells, which is one of the means of getting the changeling to reveal itself was to do something so absurd that it would be forced to speak and say, well, I'm an old fairy and I've never seen this. It's crazy. So that's where the brewery of eggshells motif comes in. So that's what some, actually mythologists, not even like paranormalists, have said, well, that's kind of a good fit, but it's also not, it's also not a good fit because we have these things where these children seem to be developmentally advanced in a way. But again, this is a stat that I like to cite, not because it's fun to cite, but I think it puts the topic into perspective. When we think about fairy lore, we normally think about, the British Isles and Ireland, especially Ireland, and infanticide was exceedingly common at one point in Ireland. To put this in perspective, we're dealing with an island, about the size of Indiana, and Elaine Farrell wrote a book looking at infanticide from 1850 to 1900, so just 50 years, and just children who were less than 3 years old. So, 3 years and a day didn't make the cut. 51 years didn't make the cut. Just 50 days, less than 3 years old. Cases of child murder in this island the size of Indiana. 4,645 cases of infanticide.
Oh my goodness.
It's a staggering number. I'm not sure what the population was during that time. That's just absolutely shocking.
And that's just the ones that were reported, right? I mean, you have to assume that there were several people who did not admit to it killing their children.
Yeah, I hadn't even. It's been a long time. I'm sure I've considered that, but it's been a while, and that's just it's startling. And there was a time where you would have a child and it would be more of a burden than a help to the family, because you've got a farm and you've got mouths to feed. And if it's all it's going to do is be another mouth to feed, a lot of these parents would find a way to culturally justify killing a child. And one of the ways to do that was fairies, and specifically changelings. So there are, plenty of court records about mothers who, mothers and grandparents who killed children. And literally, I think I can't remember where it was, but there was a grandmother who actually was acquitted because she said that she drowned her child because she was trying to put the fairy out of it. She was in Ireland. A jury actually let her go.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a very pernicious folk belief for sure.
Yeah, that is something that's scarier almost than the paranormal aspect of it. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah.
What do you think is more terrifying?
That. I mean, I'm as someone who thinks that there is an objective reality of the paranormal, sometimes I wonder if it's only as dangerous as you let it be, and even if it is existentially terrifying and objectively real, which I lean towards both those being true, it seems to happen a lot less often than human malice. So yeah, I think that, the fact that it would not only be so common but also so acceptable and condoned, that's pretty shocking.
Yeah. The story of the grandmother being, let off by the jury. Yeah, that today would never happen. She'd be locked away somewhere, I'm sure. Rightfully so. I mean, even I don't know. I mean, I try to approach it from their perspective and different morality codes and different society and strong beliefs in the Fae, especially in Ireland, right? And if you really believed that, I can't say it's justified, but at this, we're only looking through it at the scope of our, reality now. At the time, it was just as real to them as, getting bit by a poisonous snake.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not. I mean, the scary thing is that this doesn't exist solely in the past. It's. I think I just heard about this the other day that there was a conspiracy theorist who killed their kids because they thought one of them was like a reptilian. They had serpent DNA or something.
Wow.
I say that with all the love in my heart for conspiracy theorists because, I know a lot of them and a lot of them are fine people who wouldn't do that. But, so there's that. And also there's a case that I mentioned in the book in 2010 in London where a 15-year-old girl was killed and mutilated because her father and his girlfriend or sister, were convinced that the boy was a witch who was possessed by evil spirits. So it's the same motif. And it's yeah, still with us.
You have written how many books now? 5?
Depending on how you count. So I have the 2 Bigfoot books that I wrote with Timothy Renner. So including those as books that I've written, which really like he wrote one and I wrote one. Really, if you wanted to, in terms of content, parse it out that way. But if you want to count both of those as books that I've written, 5. So Trojan Feast, Brimstone Deceit, Thieves in the Night, and the 2 Bigfoot books, Where the Footprints In, volumes 1 and 2.
I have recently found myself as early as last week investigating a Bigfoot hotspot, and I think this is a good place to talk about Bigfoot and change gears a little bit. A friend of mine who I've known for a very long time, and he's in an episode of the show that will be coming out later this season. He told me this story about a Bigfoot encounter that he had, and it was really close to home, and I thought, I've never heard of, really having any Bigfoot encounters around here. Let's go to this place that's near where his Bigfoot encounters were. And this place is also known to have independent floating orbs of light. And it's an old Civil War cemetery. So I'm not really
checking a lot of boxes.
I know.
Checking a lot of boxes.
I am not so much into the traditional, ghost hunting in air quotes, but the inclusion of it being in Bigfoot country and the orbs of light, I was absolutely down. 100%. Let's go. I'll drive. I'll pick you up. Whatever you need. It's just a really weird place. And I'm a member of the Liminal Lodge, which is Nathan Isaac and Darian West and Kyle Cadell's Patreon group for Pennyroyal. And so it was Saturday night that we went out to this place. And then on Monday on their Patreon live stream, they're talking about Bigfoot with Bigfoot researcher. And he happens to bring up some of the places where he's investigated, and he mentioned Illinois, where I am. And he said the name of a town, which is 40 minutes from me. Said he didn't want to say exactly where because he still, investigates the area. And then he mentioned the name of another town in Indiana, which is also about the same distance from me. And right in between the two is this area where we were 2 days before. And he was talking about, this was the first place that he had seen the red eye glow of a Bigfoot. And not a moonlight reflection, but a glow. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at with Bigfoot story right now. That's where I'm kind of going through, and I'm definitely planning on going back there, try to pick up some more stuff. But it's just one of those weird little hot spots where I didn't think it existed, and then it has all of this different kind of activity, which is just insane.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have gotten to the point. I don't want to sound hypercritical, but I've kind of gotten. I found that my patience for people who are still really hardcore on the flesh and blood train has waned a lot since I did that book with Tim, because it's just I look at stories like that where it's so the cemetery and the lights that was all in an area where you wanted to see Bigfoot too, right?
Yeah, same exact spot.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Tim has said before. It's rare to see a UFO, and it's rare to see Bigfoot. So how many orders of magnitude does it have to be to see these things in the same spot? He's also said to people who are like, well, the UFOs are the UFOnauts are studying the Bigfoots. It's we don't see UFOs clustering around guerrilla troops or UFO. Oh, I saw an orangutan and a UFO, But people see Bigfoot and UFOs. And you look at all the stuff that Bigfoot is capable of, and it honestly, it has to be the world's only or the world's best in 17 categories if it's a flesh and blood creature.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just it has to be the world's highest jumper. It has to be the world's farthest jumper in the animal kingdom. It has to be the only animal / mammal ? With phosphorescent eyes. It has to be the world's best mammalian mimic, if not on par with the lyre bird. It's the only other mammal besides koala bears to have multiple vocal cords. Just things that just absolutely boggle the mind. It's the only primate species with a subspecies that has 3 toes. Just it has to be great at everything. It's at some point, what do you say? Oh, these things that it has to be great at have precedent in folklore. They have precedent in paranormal studies as opposed to trying to cram it all into that monkey box.
Yeah, the biological safety net. Yeah, I definitely, growing up, as an uneducated child, I definitely just assumed that, it's this big monkey man, right? And then the older I got and the more into studying the paranormal I got, I definitely put it into the side of the conversation of everything else. I definitely think we see facets of the same thing at different times in different locations based on whatever it may be, geomagnetics, weather, mental stability, mental state. There's a lot of factors that I think shape this, whatever this is, the other, into what we see or interact with. And I think that place and that night for sure further cemented that for me. I mean, we saw the UFO while I was playing Hell on the Wabash on my phone out loud on the loudspeaker, which is a Civil War song, trying to see if we could get a recording. There's just this weird, there's no map, but there are paths, and sometimes you're on a path and it goes somewhere else, You think that you're investigating one thing and it's not that thing.
Well, that's one of the things that, I don't know if you were familiar with him, but the late Jeff Ritzman sort of had a prescribed method for contacting the other, whatever that is. And that was one of the things that he would say is that, not only did he advise against it because, this thing, whatever it is, it wants your stability, like it wants your happiness. I think that can and can't be true. But anyway, he would say that one of the things that he noticed whenever people would follow this method he prescribed was that they would have an experience with something that was the last thing that they would expect. So they were looking for UFOs and they would have a ghostly apparition float in front of them. So the idea that you're out there with a ghost focus and you end up seeing a UFO is completely consistent. And I love that. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of have become skeptical about what I will be able to see and encounter, because I know that there's part of me that's always looking for it, and I feel like if I'm always looking for it, that's the last time that I'm going to see stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah, and who knows what it is that you're going. We're people like you and I, and many others. We have all of these preconceptions in our head of what we believe it is that we're dealing with, and if it pulls somehow from what you think it is to present itself, people like us who have a myriad of possibilities in our head of what we're going to see, it may just be yeah, never mind, no, I'm not interested. Yeah. So, yeah, I felt really lucky to be out there that night because, we were hearing these big crashes in the woods and then nothing. Try a voice recorder for a little while, nothing. Well, I don't really care about the ghost stuff. To me, the ghost stuff was the lowest priority. Like I said, I'm not a traditional ghost hunter. It's not something, and I'm not big on cemeteries being a place where spirits of the dead would want to hang out. I wouldn't. I don't feel like there's other things I'd like to see. So yeah, it wasn't my focus, but there's so many targets here. Let's just throw some darts, and I hit that maybe 5 minutes after hearing a tree fall down on a non-windy night on a dry week. It was a huge crash in the woods, maybe 150 yards from us. Play that Civil War tune to stir up the ghosts and there's a UFO. It's that can't all be three different things. There's no way.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you're right on point with that. Yeah, I like what you mentioned about the idea of, this thing sort of choosing from our expectations. I think that's a really important possibility that people don't really appreciate enough. Kind of started wondering if these lights that people see aren't the purest form of the phenomena, because they're in everything, right? Light phenomena is literally in every paranormal thing. And if that light doesn't somehow have a wavelength or something that stimulates the pineal gland, which is a vestigial eye, which regulates dimethyltryptamine, which has it's a psychoactive compound in our systems that has can induce insignificant qualities, states of consciousness that look a lot like shamanic initiations and near-death experiences and alien abductions and, all these things together. So I wonder if, there's not something there where the actual intelligence is this light on this certain spectrum, because it's something, a lot of people will say when they see UFOs, especially, is like, oh, it was a light, but it had a quality that I can't really describe. Like, something about it was different. And, the thing opens up the Rolodex of your brain and just sort of thumbs through it and says, let's see. Oh, it looks like they've got a great Bigfoot outfit in here. Let's throw that on, Because I think that if you're gonna look at the more fantastical stuff, because I started off as a flesh and blood adherent to Bigfoot as well, and part of me still wants that to be the case, but I think if you're a cryptozoologist and you're seriously looking at Dogman or Sheep Squatch or honestly Mothman as being like an actual cryptid, I just think you might as well build a stairway to heaven or something, It's just there's just no antecedent for it. There's no precedent in the fossil record. We have no thing to compare it to, really. I don't care how many people say that supposedly there was a branch of dogs that evolved to walk on 2 feet. It didn't. We don't see it anywhere. Anywhere. There's not even a hint of it. But werewolf folklore it's so pervasive, and people are like, well, werewolves don't exist. I'm like, well, yeah, if you're thinking about it in that sort of firm materialist way, but if we're dealing in this sort of in between space, this sort of never land between imaginary and real, then literally anything can happen.
I haven't had a chance to read Where the Footprints End, and I know that the large focus of it is on Bigfoot. But do you address the Dogman phenomenon at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that talk to people about it. And one of my favorite sound bites that I like to say about it is it's like a book about Bigfoot that's not about Bigfoot, because it's really about Bigfoot through the lens of fairy lore, Bigfoot through the lens of UFOs, Bigfoot through the lens of old world witchcraft, Bigfoot through all these things that people don't really associate with Bigfoot. And so the focus is kind of on those, at least for volume 1, is a lot more on those bodies of belief. And to that end, Dogman just sort of crops up from time to time. And, I have a working theory. If I was a little bit more familiar with grimoires, I would do this myself, but it's not quite my bailiwick. A lot of these things that people see that they want to append Squatch to, which, I mean, really, what is Dogman but Dog Squatch, right? I mean, it's Dog Squatch. Dog Squatch, Sheep Squatch, Bat Squatch, look a lot more like these spirits that you see in these grimoires, Mm-hmm. So, I think that there's an angle to that needs to be considered. And then I see a real, one of them I think is, I can't remember this is why I'm not doing that book, is because I can't remember the deity, but there's a baboon or jackal-headed spirit that's kind of sort of corresponds to the Dogman in similar ways that you might say, something like Baphomet, even though Baphomet's not necessarily a grimoire entity. You see where I'm going with that. You can sort of pick and choose. But, I think it's really interesting that you've got these stories of Bigfoot wearing clothes or bits of clothing, which don't get publicized very often, but there's plenty out there on this.
Really?
Bigfoot wearing a flannel shirt, or Bigfoot wearing pants, or Bigfoot, here's the key, wearing belts. A whole chapter on Bigfoot, a whole section of a chapter on Bigfoot wearing belts. And if you peel that apart, what that sounds a lot like is one of the ways that actual European lycanthropy worked, right? I mean, you'd have a witch that gave you a girdle, covered in some sort of salve, and from our standpoint, it probably was some sort of topically psychoactive substance that made people think that they were werewolves. But from that sort of imaginal standpoint that I like to live in, it's that's what made you a werewolf. And so you have belts being used to turn people into werewolves in the old world, and then you have Bigfoot appearing with these belts everywhere. It's that's an awfully specific item of clothing. Because I would have to say, if people see Bigfoot wearing something most often, it's probably a belt.
Are we talking a rope tied around their waist? Or are we talking like an actual manufactured belt? What? I haven't heard any of this before.
We're talking about everything from ropes to, hide loincloths to more manufactured belts from people not really getting a good glimpse at it to like space age, nanotechnology belts that like a belt that has a blue box on it that they push a button and they zap out of existence. Like runs the whole gamut. Runs the whole gamut.
It runs me to the sort of Predator illusion. The million-faceted mirror moving through the tree, like in, Missing 411, The Hunted, that documentary, the woman sees that Predator-like shape moving through the trees. The same time there's a UFO encounter.
It was Bruce Maccabee's wife.
Yeah. I knew it was somebody's wife. I couldn't remember who. But, Predator just pushes a little button, on his wrist watch and goes invisible like that. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of reports of people seeing these weird glitches moving through forests and fields and everything else.
And here's the thing, for all the people who want to, because I've been often frequently critical of like UFO Twitter and the disclosure movement.
Oh, yeah.
It's
rightfully so.
It's amazing what death threats will do to your perception of a community, right? But they're always talking about like, oh, this movie is soft disclosure, or that movie's trying to prepare us for the extraterrestrial announcement. And I think most of those ideas are goofy, but like you look at Predator and it's kind of like it looks so much, this Predator story, the Predator thing just looks so much like a lot of these Bigfoot stories that you're seeing, traveling on trees, or at least the idea that like, you can track it and then it just sort of disappears, like jumps up in a tree, which is a lot of people say with Bigfoot, and, hunting people, and, this cloaking thing, which I've talked to friends, like, normie friends who have seen something like this. And then you situate that within a couple of different things that make my mind go off in different directions. You've got the Camellia stuff that Robert Guffey talked about. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story, but very well documented story of Californian sort of washout who, for a various series of semi-humorous circumstances, ended up being gang-stalked by what seems to be an intelligence apparatus using him as like a guinea pig for experimental technology. It's a fascinating story. And then, you see the government actually coming out with and alluding to stuff that is like, this sort of invisibility technology. And then that they have technology that's, another 50 years ahead of what they're showing us in public. It's like, well, is that part of what we're seeing? And then you've also got the fact that, like, so much of this, and again, remember, I'm saying this from the standpoint of someone who thinks that the paranormal is real, but so much of the paranormal draws from popular culture. Like, I heard the other day, and I really want to track this down at some point, that the first instance of a UFO shutting down a car engine is from fiction.
Really?
Yeah. And, like, a lot of people will say, well, that means that, all the stories about UFOs shutting down car engines are bunk. And I'm like, no, I don't think that is. It's just like this, there's a story that was going around about, I'm just superstitious enough I don't want to say it, but the D-box.
Yeah.
And the idea that was, that was sort of a creative writing assignment. Everybody's like, okay, it just proves that it's all, a bunch of hooey. And I'm like, I think you guys are really underestimating the power of like the collective unconscious and like the human mind, and like the way that we can like maybe completely fashion stuff out of thin air,
Yeah.
Everybody's life is like a fiction story being brought to life moment to moment. I mean, it's really incredible when you think of it. I'm sort of getting philosophical and goofy here. But so when I hear those stories about the Ripple technology, I wonder which of those things is at play, or if John McTiernan was actually trying to tell people about technology, 40 years in the future or whatever it is now.
I don't know. I mean, I find it kind of hard to believe that some government official or soldier or something is wearing this experimental technology walking through the woods in the middle of Ohio, for no reason other than just to see if he can fool a woman in a tree,
Yeah, that's also true. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, if you saw it, 15 feet away from a fence around a military base, I would be more inclined to say, yeah, they're testing something out. But the location is important for all of these encounters to kind of put into perspective the possibilities, I think. Yeah, maybe the government has technology that we can't even begin to fathom the conception of, that they've already got that is concrete and solid, and maybe they do test it out when we're completely unaware. But it's probably not for the audience of two farmers who just saw a strange light over their cornfield in Iowa. That's probably something else.
That's good. Well, not only is that a good point, but it's also, people see these things transforming into or out of other entities. They'll see like a gray do it, or they'll see a shimmer turn into a Bigfoot, or vice versa. So it does imply that there's something that can be something non-human at the core of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think there's a lot to what the experiencer believes is going to happen, the environmental conditions, and the location. That is, to me, if we could figure out a way to crack that recipe, I feel like we could get a solid return anytime we went out looking for something.
Yeah, it's some sort of combination of factors. Because there was a time when we always thought that people who were repeating, had recurring contacts. We used to call them repeaters, UFO repeaters. So they can't be believed they're a repeater. And now it's come around to the fact that that actually strengthens your case. When people have these, unless they're, we can talk about when I do and don't believe people, but for me, somebody who's had a bunch of different things happening says, oh, okay, that, that's something about you, and perhaps, like you said, something about your place. And, maybe it's a threshold that has to be met. Maybe everybody who goes to this supercharged place is likely to have a paranormal encounter. Or maybe there are people who are 50% that can go to a 50% strange place. They cross over that threshold,
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot more to talk about on the subject, and on a lot of the subjects that we've talked about already tonight. And I think hopefully maybe in the future we can have you come back to the show and we can dive in a little further into some of these things that maybe bridge more on the philosophical aspect of these stories from across the world and across time. I think I definitely would love to have you come back on and we can try to dig deeper sometime in the future. I think it would be fun.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I turned Spookaween into Philosophaween.
No, it's the idea, the concept is to talk about things that kind of put a chill across the back of your neck, and I think almost everything we've talked about will do that. And diving into the philosophy of it and trying to justify the reality of it, I think maybe even does that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd agree. And, I did remember something that is the most, one of the creepiest things, I think, in the book. Actually, it's some of these stories that come out of, Southeast Asia. So you have these, I think that they're related, although I don't know if there's any scholarship on it, but these, women who, travel with it's just their heads, and it's their entrails who trail behind them. One of them is called the Penanggalan. And I think there's an analog in Thailand called Krasu. It's supposedly a woman who was startled by an intruder while taking a bath, and she turned her head, and it lopped her head off. And now she flies she octopuses through the jungle canopy with her entrails, looking for children to steal, and she squeezes up through the cracks in your floorboards. And I think there is some cinema out of that part of the world that has tried to depict this, but man, that's just an unsettling image.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes me back to the picture of the human nervous system laid out on a table with all the branches and neurons and everything. Yeah, that's exactly what I flashed to whenever I read that, and when you just said it, it was even more real to me. Yeah, how would you like to encounter that?
That was some John Carpenter thrown in.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. John Carpenter's the man. Well, maybe. Who knows? Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you so much for coming on for Hair Raising Horror Week and coming to Paranormal Patio. I would have loved to have had you last year, but scheduling did not agree with us, and I apologize for that. But luckily, we were here to get you this year.
It's an absolute pleasure. You know, I'm in the season of my life where I have a lot going on. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
two twin toddlers doesn't help matters. So yeah, but we'll try to make it we'll try to get back on together soon. It was a great conversation.
And before I let you go, I would love for you to let everybody know where they can find you online, your books, all that good stuff. Promote away.
Sure. JoshuaCutchin.com, JoshuaCutchin.com, and you can find links to all my books there. If you can get them from brick and mortar stores, great. I'm all about supporting those. If you have to, for pragmatism's sake, go to a large online book retailer, they can be found in all those as well. So all my books are there, all my interviews are there, a blog post where I might throw you a blog post every 6 months. So there's some poking around to be done there for sure. JoshuaCutchin.com.
All right, I will make sure that gets put in the show notes as well, so everybody can just go back to wherever you listen to this from, check the notes and open that up and go right there. And it'll, of course, be listed on the paranormalpatio.com site for everybody, for the past guests. Josh, thanks again, man. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to hopefully having another one in the future.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
Until next time, keep the fire going.